Big change doesn't start with big action. It starts with clarity. And not clarity about what you want to do, but clarity about why you want to do it. Most people believe that transformation begins the moment you take action. They think if they just do more, try harder, or push faster, things will eventually fall into place. But action without clarity is noise. It's motion without direction. And motion without direction doesn't lead to progress. It leads to exhaustion. When we don't know why something matters, every step feels heavy. Every obstacle feels personal. Every setback feels like proof that we should stop. That's why so many people quit. Not because they're incapable, not because they're lazy, but because they never anchored their effort to a purpose that could sustain them. Clarity of purpose gives meaning to small steps. Without it, even big actions feel empty. With it, even the smallest action feels powerful. Think about it. When you're deeply clear on why something matters to you, you don't need external pressure to move forward. You don't need constant reminders. You don't need someone watching. You move because stopping would feel wrong. Purpose becomes the fuel. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are busy chasing outcomes instead of understanding intentions. They want success, recognition, money, change. But they've never slowed down long enough to ask themselves why those things matter in the first place. And when the struggle comes, and it always comes, the goal alone isn't enough to carry them through. Purpose is what gives small steps their strength. It's what turns discipline into devotion. When your why is clear, you stop asking, is this worth it? Because you already know the answer. The size of the step no longer matters. What matters is alignment. Clarity doesn't mean certainty. It doesn't mean you have every answer. It simply means you understand what you stand for. It means you know the direction, even if the path is still unfolding. And once that direction is clear, small steps stop feeling insignificant. They feel intentional. The problem is, we've been taught to start with the finish line. We're told to dream big, act big, think big. But when the dream feels far away, we feel small. And when we feel small, we hesitate, we procrastinate, we doubt ourselves. But purpose changes that dynamic. When you start with why, the goal is no longer about proving something to the world. It becomes about honoring something within yourself. And that shift changes everything. Small steps work because they are honest. They don't pretend you're someone you're not yet. They meet you where you are. And when those steps are guided by purpose, they don't feel like compromises. They feel like commitments to who you're becoming. Without clarity of purpose, big actions are often reactions. We react to pressure, to comparison, to fear of falling behind. But reactions don't create lasting change. They create short bursts of effort followed by burnout. Purpose creates response, a thoughtful, intentional response, and responses can be repeated. Repetition is what builds habits. Habits are what shape lives. When you know why you're taking a step, you don't need it to be impressive. You just need it to be true. That's why people who make the biggest impact rarely start with dramatic moves. They start with conversations, with decisions, with moments where they choose alignment over applause. Clarity of purpose also gives you patience. You stop rushing the process because you trust the direction. You understand that growth isn't about speed, it's about consistency. And consistency without purpose is fragile. But consistency with purpose is resilient. When setbacks come, and they will, you don't see them as signs to quit. You see them as part of the journey. Because your why didn't disappear just because the path got hard. This is where most people get it wrong. They wait for confidence before they act. But confidence doesn't come from bold leaps. It comes from repeated, purposeful steps taken with intention. Clarity allows you to start small without feeling small. And that's powerful. Because once you remove the pressure to be perfect, you free yourself to be present. You stop chasing validation and start building integrity. You stop asking how fast you can get there and start asking how well you can move forward. Big change doesn't require you to overhaul your life overnight. It requires you to align your actions with your values, one decision at a time. Purpose is the filter. It helps you decide what matters and what doesn't. It tells you which steps to take and which distractions to ignore. Without it, everything feels urgent. With it, only the right things feel important. And when the right things feel important, small steps feel meaningful. So before you ask yourself what action to take, ask yourself why this change matters. Why now? Why you? Why this direction? Because once that answer is clear, you won't need to force progress. You'll invite it. And that's how real change begins. Not with a dramatic move, not with a massive leap, but with clarity. Before anything meaningful changes in our lives, something far more important has to happen first. We have to learn how to trust ourselves. And that trust is not built through grand promises or dramatic moments. It is built quietly, patiently, through small steps that we actually follow through on. Most people think confidence comes from success. They believe once they achieve something big, they'll finally believe in themselves. But that's backwards. Confidence is not the reward at the end of the journey. It's the result of consistency along the way. And consistency starts with small commitments. Every time you say you're going to do something and you don't, something breaks. Not publicly, not loudly, but internally. You may not notice it at first, but over time, those broken promises accumulate. And eventually, you stop trusting your own word. When that happens, even simple goals feel heavy. Motivation fades faster. Doubt becomes familiar. Small steps matter because they rebuild that trust. When you commit to something manageable and you do it, you send yourself a powerful message, I can rely on me. That message, repeated over time, changes how you see yourself, and how you see yourself determines what you believe is possible. Big goals often fail not because they're too ambitious, but because they ask for trust you haven't built yet. They demand a level of belief that hasn't been earned. Small steps earn it. Trust with yourself is not built through intensity, it's built through reliability. Anyone can be intense for a day. Anyone can be motivated for a week, but showing up consistently, even when no one is watching, even when it feels insignificant, that's where trust is formed. And once trust is formed, effort feels different. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking, should I? And start asking, what's next? Progress becomes natural, not forced. This is why small steps are so powerful. They remove the emotional risk. They don't ask you to bet everything on one move. They ask you to show up in a way that's sustainable. And sustainability is the real secret behind long-term change. We often confuse self-discipline with self-punishment. We think being hard on ourselves will make us stronger, but harshness creates resistance. Trust creates commitment. When you take small steps and honor them, you create a healthy relationship with yourself, one built on respect, not fear, on integrity, not pressure. And here's the key. Trust compounds. The first small step might not feel like much, but the second feels easier. The third feels normal. Over time, what once required effort becomes part of who you are. This is how identity begins to shift. You don't become disciplined because you decide to be disciplined. You become disciplined because you've proven to yourself repeatedly that you do what you say you'll do. Small steps turn intention into identity. And once your identity changes, behavior follows effortlessly. You're no longer forcing yourself to act in a certain way. You're simply acting in alignment with who you believe you are. This is why big change feels impossible when trust is low. You're asking yourself to believe in an identity you haven't practiced yet. Small steps give you the practice. They allow you to try on the future version of yourself without overwhelming the present one. Another reason small steps matter is because they protect you from shame. When we set goals that are too big and fail to meet them, we don't just feel disappointed, we feel inadequate. And shame doesn't motivate growth, it shuts it down. Small steps reduce the cost of failure. If you miss a day, you don't collapse. You adjust, you learn. You continue. That flexibility keeps you moving forward instead of starting over. Trust grows when progress feels safe. And when progress feels safe, you're more willing to continue. Most people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of failing themselves again. Small steps remove that fear by making success accessible. They give you wins you can actually experience, not someday, today. And those wins matter more than you think. Each small success reinforces a belief, I am capable. That belief becomes the foundation for bigger challenges. Not because you suddenly became stronger, but because you became more certain. Certainty is powerful. When you trust yourself, resistance fades. Procrastination loses its grip. You stop waiting for the right mood or perfect timing. You act because acting is what you do now. And none of that comes from a single heroic effort. It comes from repetition. Small steps don't just move you forward. They stabilize you. They create a rhythm you can rely on. And in that rhythm, growth becomes inevitable. So if you feel stuck, don't ask what massive action you need to take. Ask what promise you can make to yourself that you will keep. Make it small enough to be undeniable. Make it simple enough to be repeatable. Then keep it. Because every time you do, you're not just making progress toward a goal. You're rebuilding trust with the person who matters most. And once that trust is restored, big change is no longer intimidating. It's simply the next step. We admire intensity. We celebrate the big push, the long hours, the moments when someone gives everything they have in a single burst of effort. It looks impressive. It feels heroic, but intensity is fleeting. And anything that relies on intensity alone is destined to fade. Real change doesn't come from how hard you push in a moment. It comes from how often you show up over time. Consistency is not exciting. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't give you instant validation. And that's exactly why it works. When effort depends on mood, progress becomes unpredictable. Some days you feel inspired. Some days you don't. And when inspiration disappears, so does the action. That cycle keeps people stuck, constantly starting over, constantly waiting for the next surge of motivation. Consistency removes that dependence. When something becomes consistent, it no longer asks how you feel. It asks who you are. Intensity asks, can you do more today? Consistency asks, can you show up again tomorrow? And that question is far more powerful. Consistency is what turns effort into habit. And habits shape outcomes far more than moments of passion ever will. You don't rise to the level of your best day. You fall to the level of what you repeat. Small, consistent actions lower the barrier to entry. They don't demand courage every time. They don't wreck. You wire a pep talk. They simply require presence. And presence is sustainable. Most people overestimate what they can do in a short period of time and underestimate what they can do over a long period of time. That's why they burn out. They push too hard, too fast, and then they stop altogether. Intensity without rest leads to collapse. Consistency with patience leads to growth. Consistency also creates momentum. And momentum doesn't care how you feel. Once something is in motion, it wants to keep moving. The hardest part is not the work itself, it's the restart. That's why consistency matters more than perfection. A missed day doesn't destroy progress. Quitting does. Consistency allows for imperfection without losing direction. When you commit to showing up regularly, you stop seeing progress as a single event and start seeing it as a process. And processes are forgiving. They allow you to learn, adjust, and improve without judgment. Intensity is loud. Consistency is quiet. Intensity is dramatic. Consistency is dependable. And dependability builds results. Think about the people you trust the most. It's not the ones who make big promises in emotional moments. It's the ones who show up when they say they will. Over time, reliability becomes credibility. The same principle applies to growth. When you act consistently, you become someone you can count on. And when you can count on yourself, resistance weakens. You stop bargaining, you stop delaying, you act because that's what you've trained yourself to do. Consistency also simplifies decision-making. You no longer debate whether to act. The decision has already been made. This removes mental friction and preserves energy for what truly matters. Intensity drains you. Consistency sustains you. There's another reason consistency wins. It allows learning to compound. When you act regularly, feedback is constant. You don't wait months to realize something isn't working. You notice quickly, you adjust, you improve. Intensity often skips this step. When everything is done in one big push, there's no space to reflect, no room to evolve. Consistency builds wisdom alongside progress, and wisdom lasts. Consistency is also what transforms discipline from effort into identity. At first, showing up feels intentional. Over time, it feels normal. Eventually, it feels necessary. You don't question it. You don't negotiate with it. It's simply part of your life. That shift from effort to identity is where real change locks in. When something becomes part of who you are, stopping feels unnatural. You no longer rely on motivation because motivation is unreliable. You rely on routine. Routine is not rigid, it's reliable. And reliable systems outperform emotional bursts every time. People often say they're waiting for the right moment to go all in. But going all in once is easy. Staying in is the challenge. Consistency is how you stay in. Small actions repeated daily don't just create results, they create resilience. When life gets busy, when stress rises, when circumstances change, consistency holds you steady. It gives you something familiar to return to. Intensity collapses under pressure. Consistency adapts. This is why consistency beats talent, beats intelligence, beats ambition, because none of those matter if they aren't expressed regularly. You don't need to do more. You need to do enough, often, and often is where the magic lives. When you stop chasing dramatic progress and start honoring consistent effort, frustration fades. You stop asking, why isn't this working? And start noticing how far you've come. Progress becomes inevitable. So if you feel stuck, don't ask yourself how to work harder. Ask yourself how to show up more consistently. Reduce the size of the step if you have to. Lower the bar. Make it so easy you can't justify skipping it. Because consistency doesn't care about how impressive the step is. It only cares that you take it again, and again, and again. That's how real change happens. Momentum is not something you wait for. It's something you create. And it rarely arrives with force. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, through repetition, through the simple act of doing something again and again until it stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like an extension of who you are. Most people believe progress happens when results appear. They think once they see evidence, external proof, that what they're doing is working, they'll finally feel motivated to continue. But momentum doesn't come from results. Results come from momentum. Momentum begins the moment action becomes identity. At first, every step feels intentional. You remind yourself, you push yourself, you convince yourself. The action feels separate from you, like something you're forcing into your life. And that's normal. Every new behavior begins as an interruption, but something shifts when repetition takes over. When you repeat a behavior long enough, it stops being something you do and starts being something you are. And when that happens, moment accelerates naturally. You no longer need willpower. You no longer need reminders. You act because not acting would feel out of character. This is where most transformation truly happens, not in the action itself, but in the identity it shapes. Identity is powerful because it governs behavior automatically. You don't negotiate with it. You don't question it. You simply act in alignment with it. A person who believes they are disciplined doesn't struggle to show up. A person who believes they are consistent doesn't wait for motivation. A person who believes they are committed doesn't look for excuses. The key is that identity is not formed by intention. It's formed by evidence. Every small step you take is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. One vote won't define you, but over time those votes add up, and eventually the evidence becomes undeniable. When that happens, momentum stops being fragile. It becomes self-sustaining. This is why small steps matter so much. They are easy to repeat, and repetition is what builds identity. Big actions might create excitement, but they're hard to maintain. Small actions create patterns, and patterns create momentum. Momentum built on identity is different from momentum built on emotion. Emotional momentum rises and falls. Identity-based momentum endures. When progress becomes part of who you are, you don't feel like you're starting over every time life interrupts you. You return to the behavior naturally because it belongs to you. This is why consistency without identity feels exhausting. You're constantly reminding yourself who you're trying to be. But when identity is established, effort decreases. The be-have. Eeyore becomes familiar, comfortable, normal, and normal is powerful. People often chase motivation, not realizing that motivation follows action far more often than it precedes it. But motivation that depends on feelings is unstable. Identity is stable. When you say, "This is just what I do," you remove friction. You remove debate. You remove delay. Momentum thrives in environments with low friction. Identity also gives meaning to progress. You're no longer just completing tasks. You're reinforcing a self-image. Each action becomes a confirmation, not a question. This is why setbacks don't destroy momentum when identity is strong. A missed day doesn't erase who you are. It's just an exception, not a reversal. You don't spiral into guilt because your sense of self isn't dependent on perfection. Momentum doesn't require flawlessness. It requires continuity. When you see yourself as someone who keeps going, stopping feels temporary, restarting feels natural. That's the difference between chasing goals and embodying values. Goals have endpoints. Identity doesn't. When your actions are driven by identity, you're not racing toward a finish line. You're reinforcing a way of being. And that removes pressure. You don't need fast results to feel validated. The act itself is enough. Momentum built this way compounds quietly. Day after day, the behavior strengthens. Resistance weakens. Doubt fades. And suddenly what once felt difficult feels inevitable. People will look at your progress and call it discipline, or luck, or talent, but they won't see the real driver. The identity that made consistency automatic, and that identity was built through small, repeated actions long before the results showed up. This is also why comparison is dangerous. When you compare your early steps to someone else's established identity, you miss the process that got them there. You see momentum without seeing repetition. Momentum doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing the same thing long enough for it to become part of you. So if you feel like you're pushing uphill, don't ask how to push harder. Ask how to make the action smaller, simpler, easier to repeat. Because the easier it is to repeat, the faster identity forms. And once identity forms, momentum takes over. You stop forcing progress. You allow it. Because now moving forward is no longer something you're trying to do. It's simply who you are. We often think extraordinary outcomes are the result of extraordinary people, that there is something rare, almost unreachable, about those who achieve lasting success or meaningful impact. We look at the results and assume there must have been a moment of brilliance, a single bold decision, or a dramatic turning point that changed everything. But that belief is comforting because it excuses us. If greatness requires something exceptional, then we don't have to look too closely at our own ordinary days. The truth is far less dramatic. Extraordinary outcomes are not born from extraordinary actions. They are born from ordinary actions done consistently, deliberately, and with intention. What separates those who create lasting change from those who remain stuck is not talent, luck, or timing. It's their relationship with the ordinary. They don't wait for the perfect moment to act. They don't dismiss small efforts as insignificant. They understand that the mundane, repeated day after day, shapes the remarkable. Most people underestimate the power of the everyday because it doesn't feel meaningful in the moment. Waking up a little earlier, having one difficult conversation, making one better choice. These actions don't feel heroic. I don't deliver instant validation. And because of that, they're easy to ignore, easy to postpone, easy to abandon. But outcomes don't care how an action feels. They only care that it happens. Ordinary actions have an advantage that dramatic actions don't. They are sustainable. You don't need courage every day. You don't need a surge of motivation. You just need a willingness to show up. And showing up repeatedly is what changes trajectories. This is where most people get distracted. They chase intensity because it feels productive. They look for shortcuts because they promise speed, but shortcuts often skip the very process that makes outcomes stick. When results arrive without foundation, they collapse just as quickly. Extraordinary outcomes require stability. Stability is built slowly. When you commit to ordinary actions, you remove pressure, you stop demanding constant proof of progress, you allow growth to happen in the background, quietly, almost invisibly, and that's how real transformation works. It's happening long before you can measure it. Think about trust. Trust isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through reliability. Through doing what you said you would do, again and again. The same is true for outcomes. The world rewards those who are dependable, not those who are dramatic. Ordinary actions also create clarity. When you do something regularly, you learn. You notice patterns. You see what works and what doesn't. Progress becomes informed, not accidental. Each repetition adds a layer of understanding. This is why extraordinary outcomes often look effortless in hindsight. The struggle happened early when no one was watching, when the ions were small enough to be dismissed. By the time the result is visible, the work has already been done. Another reason ordinary actions are so powerful is that they shape character. You don't become patient by wishing for patience. You become patient by practicing patience in small moments. You don't become courageous through one big act. You become courageous by choosing honesty when it's uncomfortable, repeatedly. Character is built in the ordinary, and character determines outcomes. When you rely on extraordinary effort, you exhaust yourself. When you rely on ordinary discipline, you free yourself. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop waiting for circumstances to change. You focus on what you can do today. And what you can do today is usually small. But small is enough when it's repeated. Extraordinary outcomes are also the result of restraint. Knowing when not to do more. Knowing when consistency matters more than expansion. Ordinary actions keep you grounded. They protect you from overreaching and burning out. This kind of progress doesn't feel fast, but it is durable. And durability is what separates temporary success from lasting impact. People often ask for the one habit, the one strategy, the one mindset that changes everything. But there isn't one. There are many. And they're all ordinary. They're the choices you make when no one is applauding. The standards you keep when no one is enforcing them. Those choices accumulate quietly, relentlessly. And then one day, what once felt ordinary produces something extraordinary. Not because you suddenly became different, but because you stayed consistent long enough for the results to catch up with. The effort. This is why patience is not passive. Patience is active commitment to the ordinary. It's the decision to keep going even when progress isn't visible yet. Extraordinary outcomes don't announce themselves early, they reveal themselves later. So if you're waiting for inspiration to strike, stop waiting. Inspiration is unreliable. Structure is not. Build your days around simple actions you can repeat. Make them so ordinary they don't intimidate you, so small they don't exhaust you, because the real question isn't whether you're capable of greatness. The question is whether you're willing to respect the process that creates it. Greatness doesn't come from doing something once. It comes from doing something small, well, and often. And when ordinary actions become your standard, extraordinary outcomes become inevitable. In the end, the idea that small steps create big change is not just motivational. It's practical, sustainable, and deeply human. Real transformation does not demand that you become someone else overnight. It asks only that you begin where you are, with what you have, and take one intentional step forward. Big change begins with clarity of purpose. When you understand why something matters, progress stops feeling forced. Purpose gives meaning to effort, especially when the steps are small and the results are not yet visible. It anchors you when motivation fades and reminds you that growth is not about speed but direction. Those small steps do more than move you forward. They rebuild trust with yourself. Each promise you keep, no matter how simple, strengthens your confidence. Over time, consistency replaces doubt. You stop questioning whether you can do it because you've already proven to yourself that you will show up. Trust becomes the foundation on which everything else stands. Consistency then takes over, quietly outperforming intensity. You no longer rely on emotional highs or bursts of effort. You build habits that don't ask how you feel, only who you are. Progress becomes predictable, not dramatic. And in that predictability, growth compounds. As those consistent actions repeat, something deeper happens. Your identity begins to shift. What once felt like effort becomes normal. Momentum no longer depends on motivation. It flows naturally from who you believe yourself to be. Setbacks lose their power because they don't threaten your identity. They are simply part of the process. And finally, the extraordinary emerges from the ordinary, not through heroic moments, but through simple actions done daily with intention. The discipline to respect the small things, the patience to stay consistent, and the humility to trust the process are what create lasting outcomes. What looks extraordinary to others is often just ordinary effort sustained over time. This is the quiet truth of meaningful change. You don't rise because of one big decision. You rise because you made many small ones and kept making them when no one was watching. So don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't underestimate today. Ask yourself what small step you can take right now, one that aligns with your values, builds trust, and is easy to repeat. Take it, then take it again tomorrow. Because when small steps are guided by purpose, repeated with consistency, and embraced as part of who you are, big change doesn't remain a hope. It becomes inevitable.